Minister Rivers, thanks first of all for being here with us on CIG-TV. You have a huge ministry. Lots of work has to be done.
Yes.
Let's begin by talking to our viewers about the labor aspect of your ministry.
Sure, and thank you, Donna, for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak to you and your viewers about the many initiatives and activities which, as Minister of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, as you alluded to, it is a huge ministry and it is a mammoth task. But as I always say, if it's a tough job, give it to a woman. But no, we are doing some very exciting things, and I'll start with the employment and labor side, as you suggested. So just recently, as you may recall, we launched a new online interface which I've been pushing since taking office. This is one of the things that I campaign very heavily on, which is to basically increase the level of transparency, increase the accountability in the system with respect to employment and helping Caymanians that are suitably qualified get access to the real employment opportunities, but also allowing an interface between the work of the NWDA and the Immigration Department and the boards. So basically, before work permits are authorized, they will be able to see from the labor side what efforts have been made by these companies to attract suitably qualified Caymanians, and if they weren't able to find, what were some of the reasons given, and therefore it'll help the process with respect to when they go to make a decision. They can make a better informed decision about information that's been provided through the database that I've just mentioned. So right now the database is housed with the National Workforce Development Agency, but the Immigration Department is now able to access the information with respect to who's applied for jobs, which jobs have been registered with the NWDA prior to actually seeking a work permit. And that's really what the goal is, to re-engineer that process. So instead of going to seek work permits and then seeking suitably qualified Caymanians by saying the work permit board, turning them back to seek the services of the NWDA, we're encouraging employers to register with the NWDA up front, get their jobs in the system, because what we want to create is a clearinghouse, basically, of all jobs in the market at any given time. That's the goal of the database as I envisage it. And so basically Caymanians and other permanent residents, legal and ordinary residents who are qualified to actually seek job opportunities locally, they'll be able to go and know what is in the market at any given time and to be able to apply through the database at that time to initiate the contact with the employers. And employers will be able to keep very detailed information about how interviews went and why they felt that the persons that were either put forward by the NWDA or persons who self-refer, because we've introduced an option now where people that may not necessarily need the full-on services that the NWDA offers, they just need to know what jobs are available. They can then self-refer themselves as well. So it creates a much more transparent process. It creates a much more accountable process, because now the NWDA, the officers, they also have to give reasons why they think that certain persons are suitable to be referred to companies, because we'd received some complaints about companies feeling that people that were previously referred either through the Department of Employee Relations, which is a predecessor to the National Workforce Development Agency, that they felt that they weren't suitable and they were just being sent people because they were ticking the boxes and whatnot. This system now actually puts the onus on the officers at the NWDA to give detailed reasons why they think that this person is suitable, and therefore the employers are now able to look at the CVs, look at the applicants, and they're expected to really take best efforts to find suitably qualified Caymanians. And if they're not able to do so, they're also expected to give that reason and that rationale as well. So the system allows for information transferal between NWD and immigration, but it also protects. There is privacy mechanisms put in place, so people's identity is protected, etc. So it's really a milestone that I think that the country needs to know, within 10 months of taking office, so less than a year, we were able to put in place something that is absolutely critical, I think, in terms of moving us forward with helping companies to abide by their obligations, which is to find and to take best efforts to find suitably qualified Caymanians, but also to assist persons in the market, as I said, the priority categories under the immigration law, the Caymanians, permanent residents, married to Caymanians, people that are legally and ordinarily resident. They are also able to get access to this information in a much more transparent manner in terms of what jobs are in the market. Again, it's very much dependent as it stands right now. Companies are not required, but they're actively encouraged to register with the NWDA, register their employment opportunities. And we've tried to make that as easy and accessible as possible because now that's all online.
Right.
So previously, a lot of the issues that the agency was having and that I inherited, I mean, there's a ton of legacy issues coming into this position as the new minister. I took on, and I knowingly took on because I realized that we needed to really put an emphasis on systems and on management and on mechanisms to improve the way government functions and operates for the benefit of the employment world, both employers and employees. And so we've made that electronic. So we've cut out a lot of the inefficiencies by having to do everything manually, coming into the office and physically filling out a form, which then needs to be transcribed by somebody else. And so we've made that much more streamlined so employers can actually register, from their desktops.
Right.
They can log on electronically, they get a unique identifier, and they can go through the process that way. There still obviously will be some issues with respect to, technical issues that may come up from time to time, but we are aware, and I have, given specific directions that we need to have suitable support in place to ensure that employers are able to, register in a timely fashion, they get timely responses, and therefore the system will run automatic kind of searches for suitable matches for persons, and then, as I said, persons that may need a bit of extra support from the NWDA through training opportunities that we provide, through coaching, those persons would be able to continue to access those services, and we have a little bit more hand-holding, so to speak. But just people that are either in between jobs or still at jobs but looking to move, they're able to register and self-refer as well, as long as you fit within, as I said, the priority categories that are outlined in immigration law, being Caymanian being, of course, the number one priority, but then the permanent resident, married to Caymanian, legal and ordinary resident. So that's something that I'm very excited about because, as I said, it's something that it's a first step in the right direction in terms of helping to improve efficiency in the system, helping to improve transparency, helping to improve accountability. The next step that we're looking to work towards is making it possible for all employees or job seekers to be able to register online or electronically as well. Currently, that's in the testing phase. So, in most instances, people have to come to the office. But what we've launched this month, in an effort to try to make it more accessible, while we're working on figuring out and getting the online or the electronic accessibility to each interested employee. In the interim, we are going to the districts, and we are actually in all of the districts once a month, and there's a schedule that people can get access to by either calling or logging on to the NWDA's website. So if you're not able to actually physically come into our central Georgetown location, which is above the Butterfield branch at Midtown Plaza, we will be in each of the districts, including the sister islands, on a monthly basis as well, because we realize we need to get to the people that need the services the most.
Do you feel that one of the challenges has been, particularly for the NWDA and the Labor Department, that persons who are higher skilled potential employees are not registering with the NWDA? I
think initially, like I said, there was lots of legacy issues, and I really don't want to get into what should have been done and what could have been done and all of that in terms of prior to taking office. I'm very much about doing an assessment of where we are now and how do we move the system forward.
Right.
And that's exactly what I did. I mean, when I first took office, the very first agency that I visited in June, early June, was the NWDA, and I got a good overview as to what they are supposed to be doing in theory, what they were set up and how they were set up at the time, what the challenges were, and a number of those challenges were just came down to the agency not being adequately resourced in terms of staff. They had like 4 persons in the agency, and they were expected to service, at the time they had a close to 2,000 people registered, I believe, at the time. What we've since done is I've asked them to really look at the registration, the database, to scrub the database, so to speak, to see who is still registered, who is still unemployed, because there wasn't any system where people would, if they found jobs, they would then inform the NWDA and they were removed from the list. So there was there was a large number of persons registered, but when they actually went to do a proper assessment and they contacted each individual and said, are you still interested in finding employment? Have you found employment? When they did the kind of scrubbing exercise, we've actually brought that number down to just over 1,000.
Oh, wow.
So just over 1,000 people that were still registered who were actively seeking employment. So that exercise alone actually gave us a better indication as to the real numbers of unemployed persons. I mean, you hear people throwing out figures of 3,000, 2,500. I mean, a lot of the information is historic, based on the labor force surveys that we have. That's really so. We wanted to get a real grasp as to, well, what is the real situation amongst unemployed Caymanians, and who is it that's seeking work. And so we encouraged people at that time to register. Now, I know, as I said, there were lots, and there will still be, I think, lots of legacy concerns that people had, or people have. And businesses in particular had some concerns, as I said before. They felt that they were being sent people that weren't suitably qualified, or that didn't have any of the skills to match the jobs that they required. Persons registering felt they weren't being contacted, or the follow-up didn't happen in a timely fashion. So there were lots of complaints all around. And a big part of that was just lack of staffing. I mean, that was a fundamental problem. So as I came in, and for the new budget year, I immediately identified some key positions that we just absolutely had to have in order for the agency to work the way it was set up to work. One of that being, we have a training manager in place now. We have 3 additional employment services officers who are basically the client interfacing persons to work with people to ensure that they, develop the skill sets if there is any skill gaps, and also just to do the proper assessment of people when they first came in to determine where they're at, if their interests match their skills, and therefore would they be appropriate to then be referred to jobs. So there's been a lot of work that's been done in that respect. And so we've really tried to be more proactive and dealing with some of the complaints and dealing with some of the issues. And as I said, it's very much a work in progress. But as minister, I am determined to recognize the issues, recognize the problems, and work towards addressing them and giving the support that obviously the staff needs in terms of the political direction and policy directives, which I've done with respect to saying, the NWDA and making sure that we have the emphasis on developing the agency so it is fit for purpose is a key. It's key to the success of the country in terms of helping to for the human capital development strategies which we have, but also just to build the confidence in the market again about the agency. And as I said, the agency was launched in 2012, but it was launched as a skeleton prior to obviously me taking office. But as I said, once I took office and realized that the expectations were unreasonable given what they were working with, I felt it was necessary to put the kind of emphasis on resources, and the government agreed, and so we voted for the positions. I've managed to hire most of those positions that needed. And now, I mean, we're still, I wouldn't go as far as saying fully complemented, but we're much better than where we are now, and we're much more, I think, efficient in the way that the system works. And we've just been, we've been getting, the feedback has been very positive. People have noticed the difference. The users of the system has said, in various means by email and call, saying, look, I can see the difference. I can see what you're doing, and it's starting to bear fruit. And that in itself is really the kind of the positive motivation that's very helpful, and the feedback that's helpful.
Right. Now, I know you ran largely on the labor issue, which is dear to your heart, but education is one of those things that's very dear to your heart too, and you were able to have that as part of your ministry. Let's talk a little bit about education. Lots of challenges there as well. But again, I'm sure that the general public realizes that you have two very major areas under your ministry, and that nothing is going to be done in one day or even a few years. It takes a long time for it all to bear fruit in the long term. Yeah. So let's talk about education, some of the challenges and some of the changes that are taking place there.
Well, yes, Donna. I mean, as you indicated, I mean, education obviously very near and dear to my heart personally, but also, it is the cornerstone in any society with respect to the longevity, the success, of the preparation of our people, of our country, to be able to continue to thrive. And so, lots of work has started prior to my taking office, but also, as I said, my goal is to not create the empires that I think the education system has suffered from in the past. I think, as I said during the campaign process, still very relevant in terms of how it guides my view. Education has often been a victim of political circumstance, because as one administration comes in, they decide that they don't want and have anything to do with the previous administration. And I think we saw that when there was a changing of the guard of the last administration and what was done the administration prior to that. So there was a lot of work that had been done in the previous PPM administration with respect to the national curriculum and moving that process forward. And then the last UDP administration came in and they did some work that didn't necessarily, I think, incorporate as much as they could have with respect to what was done previously. And then they went on to launch the National Strategic Plan for Education, which when I took office, I made a conscious decision that I'm not interested in throwing the baby out with the bathwater because my name isn't on it. Education is a process. And it doesn't work in 4-year political cycles. It's our children's lives that we're dealing with, and so we have to take a very mature and we have to take a very pragmatic approach to what needs to be done. So I initially, and I said this at the very first teacher forum that took place at the beginning of the last school year, when I spoke, I said, I've read the National Strategic Plan. There are many things about the plan that I think I agree with and that I think is good for the country, and I will continue to push for. There are areas that I feel that that haven't been suitably represented in terms of the focus and emphasis. So I have added those as additional strategic priorities, some of those being emphasis on special education needs, the behavioral areas, conflict management, conflict resolution, those type of issues that we seem to hear a lot about in the press today. That was an area that I recognized that needed more emphasis. Areas such as gender issues in the education system. Why is it that it seems, and this is just me sitting down making an observation, I've asked for detailed analysis to take place, but why is it that when our young boys move from primary school to high school, there seems to be a real adjustment or transitional issues that they face when they're coming out at the high school level? So in other words, why are so many of our young men seemingly failing in the system? So that's an area that I was of concern for myself, and there's some other gender-related issues as well. And then there was a number of other areas in the education system that I felt that the strategic plan, even though it provided a good platform or a good way forward on a number of the key priority areas, there were some other areas that I've put forward that needed additional strengthening as well. So that's where we're at. I'm actually looking to move the efforts of the strategic plan forward. I've actually gone back and looked at some of the work that was done in the previous PPM administration as well. There was a big push on values and values education that happened during that time that I think is very, very relevant still today. And so I'm looking to basically build on that as well. And also, we are at the stage now where we're looking at the legislation and the legislative framework. And I think we are moving the legislative framework forward, building again on the education modernization law, which was passed in the House in 2009, but which was never really enacted. And now we know we've since had a constitution, and a constitution that's been enacted. And so we're now looking at the education framework in view of our constitution and the Bill of Rights in particular. So we're looking to move the legislative framework forward so it actually is relevant to today's requirements and expectations under the law, but also to ensure that some of the policies which we've adopted in education is actually enshrined and has legislative support and backing.
Okay.
I think we've done a lot of work from the early childhood education perspective. We've actually just recently, or since taking office, the guidelines for early childhood education has been approved and passed by Education Council. And so educators in this area, really, they now have a framework and a curriculum which is being finalized as well, which will enable our early childhood education centers to really become the kind of centers of excellence that we know that they need to be, because that's really where we have to start. We have to start by focusing on making sure that our children get the best chance and start in life. Most of the research will show that between the ages of 0 to 8, those are the critical fundamental years of a child's education. And so by focusing on early childhood education, that's really helping to address those critical needs and concerns. And I think we've got a very strong early childhood education team who's working very hand in hand with the practitioners or the private sector practitioners, as well as the government schools. Most government schools, but for Red Bay Primary, have reception classes now at the school itself. So we're looking to make sure we strengthen that. And for the obviously those parents that are in the catchment area for Red Bay Primary that cannot access it in the government schools, we do have provisions in place to help those parents, if need be, to access the private education. So we're looking really much at strengthening the delivery of the services to the early childhood education, but also to the primary schools. From literacy and numeracy. We've got lots of programs in place that target young people that are struggling from the literacy and a numeracy perspective. We have a number of coaches that work with educators, the teachers themselves, because especially mathematics, it's not intuitive to be able to teach.
Right.
It's hard enough to have to learn mathematics for some of us, but then to expect to be able to teach it, it isn't necessarily something that I think even all primary school teachers are comfortable with. So as a system, we recognize that they need the support, and so we've got some very strong mathematics and numeracy coaching system that's in place. We're very fortunate to have the partnership, and a big part of the thrust, my thrust as Minister of Education, is to develop partnerships with the private sector. And so we've got the Cayman Islands Society of Professional Accountants who are working with us to help to deliver the numeracy projects and some of the numeracy training programs that we have in place for the leaders in primary mathematics and otherwise. And from the literacy side, we're working very closely with the LIFE organization, which is the Literacy is for Everyone. And they're a non-governmental organization which is really concerned about ensuring that, the standards of literacy are raised throughout the country. And so they work very closely with us in the primary schools as well, and offering volunteers and helping to support some of the literature programs that are being offered. So those are two organizations which we work very closely with to not just help to sponsor financially, but to deliver and to help work one-on-one with students, and helping to work with teachers as well to help to deliver the literacy and numeracy programs. And we're starting to see results. We're starting to see positive results in that area. Because as you know, when they get to high school, obviously, it doesn't mean that the interventions shouldn't happen, and I believe we still need to have more interventions, and that's where support for either the special education needs or students that are just struggling to kind of manage with what they're expected to manage. We need to build those type of supports in a more effective way, because I think the system, from what I'm gathered doing the assessment that I've done, we've got a lot of resources there now, but the big thrust as minister is to really look and help the team look at the management and the governance structures to ensure that we're really getting value for money spent. Because you often hear the cry, well, we need more of this and we need more of that. Well, my job as minister is to kind of start to ask the questions, well, what are we doing with what we have now? And those are the kinds of questions that I've been asking, and that's the kind of that's led to some of the need to reorganize some of the systems that we have in place, and to re-engineer some of the programs to make sure that they're actually effective in delivering what they're intended to deliver. In some areas, we still need more, and so that doesn't take away from the fact that I will, have to battle for those resources when we as a government have to make a decision about how the resources are divided between the ministries. But in many areas I've recognized that we can actually improve the governance, improve the management, improve the delivery of the services by actually just looking at evaluating what we have now. And so that's a lot of that work is what's is happening right now in the system, is looking at the education system and really kind of evaluating where we're at, and then helping to kind of plan the blueprint for what changes that should be made. And then in doing that, then if we need additional resources to support that, then we'd look at doing it that way, but not just throwing more resources at a system without looking at what are some of the fundamental issues that we have.
You mentioned earlier that you added the areas of special needs and behavioral issues as part of the strategic plan because you didn't feel that the plan actually addressed those enough. Why was that? Why did you add those? Well,
again, I mean, it wasn't like that was prophetic or anything, because now 10 months later you're hearing all this stuff in the system. I just felt when I read during the campaign and I read the strategic plan, because again, the areas that were of great emphasis for me were labor and education, as you said. And so it was incumbent upon me to get familiar with these areas before I could speak on them, even at the campaign mode. And when I looked at it and I felt, well, to me, it just didn't seem like there was enough emphasis based on just my own observation, based also too on my kind of interests. I mean, my first degree was in psychology, so I have some interest in that area of as a discipline, and looking at the kind of whole mental health and the holistic development of children, and how that can be a barrier or an asset depending on where the child is coming in with to their ability to learn. And so I felt that once just looking at the plan and looking at some of the areas that I thought that could have been strengthened, that was definitely an area that I felt needed to be an area of focus. And so I had commissioned, early this year actually, I commissioned a detailed review of the kind of behavioral management systems that we have in place, but also a look at the special education needs, because the two aren't necessarily the same. And I think some people may assume that, they're one and the same, but they're really not. It's just some students that may be struggling can also display some behavioral management issues, but it isn't vice versa. Like if you are displaying behavioral problems, doesn't necessarily mean that you would be considered special education needs. And special education needs is actually a quite broad spectrum. That includes those students that you would consider to be gifted and talented, students that are not pushed enough, students that get into problems because they're just bored with what the curriculum is offering or how the teaching is being done. And so we want to make sure that at all ends of the spectrum, including those that may be struggling, those that may be having the learning challenges that need to have the extra supports, we need to find a way to ensure that the curriculum and that their experience is really child-centered. And so that it's about what is in the best interest of our children, and trying to make sure that the experience is relevant to as many of our children as possible. Because a lot of the times, the issues I think that happen with behavior, it's either children aren't seeing that it's relevant to them, and not, they don't have that connection, especially in this age of technology where everything is at a click of it's not about information, it's about processes and how that information is delivered, and also the context in which it's delivered. That's as important as the information themselves, because many of our students can find the information on their own. They don't need a teacher to stand up and tell them that. It's about how are you delivering that information, and is it engaging? Is it exciting? Is it something that's relevant? And so the whole teaching methodology and the teaching strategies need to reflect that as well. So there's a big emphasis on professional development, and I've asked the professional development team to ensure that they incorporate behavior strategies and helping teachers to be able to manage behavioral issues that they may not have initially been aware of, and when they first were educated to become a teacher. So it's a constant process. I mean, teachers are expected to do a lot in a day. They, in many cases, many of them are just, they seem like they're managing the class as opposed to being able to teach. And so that's a big complaint or concern that many of our teachers have. So it's about trying to find ways to help teachers to understand that their role is changing as well in this changing environment and this changing expectations. They're not just there, as I said, to deliver information, but it's about, getting a system where they're engaging the students in their own learning, but also helping them with the tools, but also with the support needed to develop behavioral management strategies that are effective. And so I was just at a PTA at one of the secondary schools recently, and as minister I've actually been visiting a number of the PTA meetings at the various schools to interact directly with parents about their concerns. And I said, this September you will see some changes with respect to the whole behavior management and the expectations that that the ministry has of the Department of Education, and that the department will have of the schools will have of the parents. And so we're looking to build a system in conjunction with parents, in conjunction with the educators, and put in place a system that is more accountable in terms of how and what we expect of our children, what we expect from our parents in the system, what we expect from our teachers. And so that's these kind of systemic issues is where I'm really trying to focus on, because this is where you're going to see lasting changes. Anybody that's looking for quick fixes, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to disappoint you there. That's not going to happen. This kind of systemic problems that the system faces didn't happen overnight, and the solution isn't going to happen overnight. But what I can assure the public in saying is that, look, I'm recognizing that there are real issues, and that I'm committed to working to find real solutions. And it may not be on anybody's political timetable that is suitable for the talk shows, but it is something that we're already starting to make progress, because I've already identified what some of the key areas of concerns are, and I've asked for the relevant reviews and looking at putting together the action plans in order to address the issues. So watch this space. We'll have some more to talk about in the coming months about what some of the changes will be in the area of the kind of whole behavioral management strategies that we're developing.
Let's move on to high school a little bit. One of the things that's always been recommended, talked about, addressed, and I know that the education system currently as it stands does address it in a very small way, is the possibility of vocational technical school as it is. At one time I wanted to be a cosmetologist or a hairdresser. I went to a vocational technical high school in New York. You had to take an exam, a little entrance exam to be accepted. It's a 4-year program. You did your freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year. Once a week I attended a cosmetology class, along with my regular English, math, science, whatever it was that I was taking at the time. Did that for 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, you would get a high school diploma as well. You were licensed by the state of New York as a cosmetologist. This is the kind of program that people are thinking of. I thought it would have been a very successful thing. Of course, I didn't end up staying in New York, but this is the kind of program that people are talking about. Do you see this in the future for Cayman at all at some point?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the focus of this in terms of what I'm hoping to develop for next year as well. Now, the whole idea of introducing curriculum changes, there's a whole timing aspect to that as well. But I've actually charged my policy team and DES with the responsibility to develop a workable vocational and technical training program to enhance what's there now. Because right now there are a number of courses that are offered, but it's that type of, when students graduate, we want them to graduate with a skill. For many students, be it that skill being academic, we still want to offer the opportunities for students to continue to be the high flyers in the academic side, but there are many students that have intelligences which I don't think are being tapped into sufficiently, which include the kind of technical, the vocational, the artistic, the more manual type intelligences, which they may have the individual class here and there, but there isn't this kind of concentrated effort that says that this will lead to you being able to do X. So absolutely, that is something that I'm looking to get into the schools at an even earlier age. Right now we have the opportunities at SciFEC. So for those students that get to year 12 and that they're more technically inclined. They're able to do additional courses at SciFec itself that leads to more of the technical and vocational qualifications, the BTECs and the like. But I believe that there are many students that you need to capture them at an earlier age. So even from, say, 14, when they're starting to make their choices about the courses, giving them not just the opportunity to take the technical and vocational courses, but having it actually lead to something that is tangible. So no, we are definitely there. I'm on the same page with you there, and I've actually already given that instruction. And we're looking to see how possible to actually have, and my goal, or my dream, and I know I say this because, there's always budget constraints, and there's always, head count constraints and everything else that I'm hearing, but I would like to actually have a coordinator of technical and vocational education and training that works from within the schools straight on up, that works so that the person would be straddling the both education from the formal education within the schools, but also at the NWDA working with those students that may have graduated that still are trying to find their place in this world and need to have that ability to be able to say, oh, here are the programs that they can go into, and having somebody that can help to coordinate that process. I'm looking at seeing if that's something that I can actually make happen. In the interim, as I said, the team that I have now, I've asked them to look at developing and fleshing this out in a bit more detail in terms of how we can structure the programs. Because I don't believe we need a technical high school as such. I believe what we can do is to just enhance what we have in the high schools now, and give more of an opportunity for those students that have that type of inclination and intelligence, as I said, give them a real opportunity to graduate with a skill, a concrete skill that will allow them to either start their own business or get a job or do something that's meaningful and constructive. I've also been from the kind of training and apprenticeship training side. I'm in conversation with a number of companies, businesses, including the Chamber of Commerce, and the intention is to launch a national apprenticeship program in the near future as well, which basically will start with 3 to 5 industries as a starting point to say, okay, these are the industries, and the choice of industries really are we're looking at what the immigration statistics are showing. Where are the majority of our work permit holders? What are the areas that we're bringing in many people? Right. Those are the areas that we'll start with in terms of as focus areas for apprenticeships. Because we know that there is a need, there's an obvious need for persons that are skilled in these areas. And so by actually helping to develop programs with private sector, because private sector are the ones that we're going to have to rely on in terms of providing the actual on-the-job training. The ministry, we're looking at the actual kind of academic training side that may be needed for each industry to help to support the training to the individuals that go through these apprenticeships. But we're building the relationships with the employers or potential employers to say, okay, however we structure the program, because it'll depend on the industry, because as you say, cosmetology may require one set of structure. Construction may require something totally different in terms of the amount of hands-on training versus academic training. So we'll have to structure it, and we're looking to structure it on an industry by industry basis, but we're looking at some of those key industries that we know that there's a need. There's a lot of work people on work permit. And we know that there's a lot of interest, because there are a lot of young people that take the kind of technical courses, but may not necessarily realize that we can actually turn that into an employable skill, which will allow them to actually transition into the world of work. And we know that youth in particular are the most vulnerable when it comes to being unemployed in any society. I mean, Cayman is no different. Cayman Islands is no different. Their unemployment rate is more than double the national average. So the focus still needs to be very much on helping our young people make that transition from formal education to the world of work when they come to that stage. So those are definitely some of the initiatives that the ministry and through the various agencies we're working on bringing to fruition.
Okay, now that we've got labor and education out of the way, another part of your ministry is gender affairs. Lots going on there as well. Let's talk a little bit about what some of the things that are happening under your gender affairs part of the portfolio?
Well, yes, as you know, and I look forward to seeing you there come this Saturday. We are the ministry through our gender affairs unit. The major push right now is we are hosting the first ever national conference on women. And that's really, the aim of that is to bring together, it's an empowerment conference, and it's to bring together people in the community, both men and women, who are concerned about gender equality and gender inequity that it exists. And so to talk about areas that are, that pose particular challenges to women and young girls and women in areas of economy and employment and healthcare and family planning, and a number of other areas that focus areas. And these focus areas are really kind of aligned with the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Because on International Human Rights Day last year in December, we the ministry formally asked the FCO to extend the convention. Now, this was not the first attempt by the government. The governments previously had done so as well, but we'd never really made much progress beyond certain legislative changes. So we've made what we feel to be the necessary legislative changes, including the gender equality law, which was recently launched in, I think, 2010. And so now we feel that we've got the legislative framework to support what the convention requires in terms of trying to deal with issues of discrimination in the workplace, in the education system, etc. And so what we want to do is have this conference to bring together the key stakeholders, women, of course, but also men and other persons in the community that would be there to support the initiatives of the country and to shape the initiatives of the country, because we want to make this a Cayman Islands specific strategy. Not interested in just adopting wholesale something from overseas and trying to make it fit in our environment. We need to make sure that we shape the agenda, we shape the strategies, we shape the policies, and the ministry is very much interested in hearing from people in the community that have been, the stalwarts, that have been the pioneers, that have been the persons that have been fighting for equality and fighting for gender equity in your respective experiences. And we want to bring that together, bring you together, so we can have this national dialogue, but from that bring out some of the key concerns that you may have and key opportunities and strategies. So when we put together a plan of action, it's informed by local people, by local experiences, and also it provides an opportunity in the afternoon for persons to hear from a regional expert on the convention who is based in Jamaica, but she's got wealth of experience in not just the region, but in the world, in working with countries to do as we are attempting to do here in the Cayman Islands. And then at the end of the conference, I will be giving the kind of way forward that the government intends to do in order to deal with some of these areas that I said will come out of the discussions based at the conference, but also just moving the agenda of ensuring that both men and women have equal and fair opportunities for personal advancement, for career advancement, for family advancement. So that's kind of the thrust of where we are from the gender equality side. And so it's a very small team, but they work very hard, and they work along with the Family Resource Center, which is actually in a different ministry. It's under the Premier, but they work very closely this month in particular, being Honoring Women's Month, and in November it is the month basically to honor men as well. So it's we do try very much to have that equity in focus and experiences, and so that's where we are.
As it relates to gender equality, though, and your Ministry of Gender Affairs that falls within your ministry, we all know that we'd like to see more women in the Legislative Assembly, for instance. We have our first governor now. We have our first elected premier, or a premier that was the first female premier that was put in place. But so many other countries around the world have women presidents, women prime ministers, so on and so forth. What are your hopes for the future as far as seeing women really being appreciated and uplifted in the political realm, and to have more women within politics? What are your hopes for that?
Well, I mean, I myself, obviously being one of two elected representatives, women in the House. I'm very much for getting more equal representation in the Legislative Assembly, in the legislative process. I mean, this past election campaign, 2013, was the most women I think we've ever had run in any one campaign, and that was 9. Right. So that in itself, I think, was a very positive step. The community, obviously, I think, recognizes that women have a role to play at all levels of the community, including at the very highest level, which is representing the country as an elected representative. And so I would encourage women to stay involved, to stay interested, and to feel empowered to put yourself forward. Now, it's not easy. I'll be the first to say it's not an easy task. And as a woman, we've got challenges that many of our men counterparts don't have. You know, many of us are mothers, and we still have that role of primary caregiver, which, as I say, you know, to anybody that will listen, I love what I do. I feel blessed to be able to represent this country, but I'm a mother first.
Right.
And I always have to acknowledge the fact that I have an obligation to somebody who completely relies on me for just about everything in terms of, you know, protection and support. And so I have to be able to give of myself in that way when it's needed. And so that in itself, sometimes there are challenges, and sometimes you're having to make decisions that you have to say, well, you know, is it in the best interest of my child to do this versus that? And so, you know, whereas I'm very committed to serving the country, I'm also committed to making sure that I live up to my obligations as a mom. And so these are some of the challenges that I think that women parliamentarians face. I mean, there are other challenges as well. I mean, the whole issue, I mean, there are a number of issues which we hope to have a good, fruitful discussion about at the conference on Saturday. So anybody interested in those issues, I hope you've signed up, because we definitely want to hear from you in that particular plenary session. But from a regional perspective, I'm very much involved, and I try to stay involved at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's Committee on Women. And I try to, because I think that in itself, being able to network with other women parliamentarians helps me as a parliamentarian to kind of know and anticipate what are some of the challenges that, you know, that we face, not just locally but regionally, but also helping to find ways and strategies that they may have with respect to encouraging women participation. Because that's really what I, as a female parliamentarian, as a woman, I'm hoping that I inspire another generation of women, just as I was inspired by the generation of women in the House before me, to step forward and to realize that, you know, we have a valid voice, we have valid concerns, and we have the ability to do and represent. And I think our perspective is actually a unique one, because, I mean, let's face it, women, we just want to get the job done.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. We want to see the successes. We want to get that we're good at the multitasking.
Yeah.
We do it on a daily basis.
Right.
And so, you know, that helps us to be naturally inclined to take on the challenges that we face. And I have to say, I mean, I very much draw on those experiences when, you know, I'm having to deal with the multitude of issues in my very broad and diverse ministry. And so from that perspective, I'm very much in support of women stepping forward, because, you know, it'll help, I think, the society as a whole to move forward, to have that balance and perspective.
Right. That leads me to a quote that I often hear of, and it says, do you want to speak to the man in charge or the woman who gets the job done? You know, which is to me, that's a very important thing, which leads me to my final question to you, Minister Rivers. Do you think a lot more work has to be done when it comes to women and how they're treated in the workplace, whether it's in the private sector or the civil service? The world over, there seems to be issues with how women are treated compared to their male counterparts, the way that they're addressed, sir, compared to a first name of a woman, who are on the same level in the same positions. Do you think a lot of work still has to be done, and where would you like to see that end up?
I think work has been done, but I think we have a lot of work to do. I think we have to acknowledge that we've come a long way, because now we've got legislation that actually makes certain types of behavior illegal.
Right.
And that in itself may help people to kind of rethink certain behaviors that they may be inclined to do or not do. But the legislation is one thing, the mindset is something else.
Right.
And I think what we need to do as women, as professionals, we need to continue to help our counterparts if necessary to understand that, there is a time and a place for everything, and how you address us in the workplace can actually have inadvertently or otherwise negative ramifications in terms of people seeing women in positions of power, either by undermining their authority by certain expressions or certain interactions. And so yes, I think that there is a lot of work to be done, and it's just that gender sensitivity and training, which the Gender Affairs Unit is involved with as well. We conduct, working along with the Department of Labour and Pensions, we are looking to conduct that type of gender sensitivity training, which I think is important. But there are many advocates, there are many men who are advocates for gender equality as well, and I think we need to recognize that too. And I think that for those individuals who may see their male counterparts being less respectful or things that may not necessarily be something that they believe or they promote, they should feel empowered to speak out about it as well. Because if you see wrong and you don't do anything about it, then you're complacent. Right. And you're complicit, and that's a part of the problem in many instances. But if people start to recognize that certain behaviors, traditional or otherwise, if they're not acceptable for you within your own moral code, then you have the obligation to either speak to that person offline or to try to do something about it to change the environment. Because oftentimes, the women that may be subjected to certain behaviors may not feel empowered to do anything about it because they may feel that further victimization or otherwise. Although in those instances, I'd like to say that the gender equality law, as I said, certain behaviors that can be considered discrimination are illegal. And so if you feel that you are the subject of any such discrimination, then you have a right to bring a claim to the Gender Equality Tribunal, which the ministry acts as secretary for. So there are remedies in place for persons that may feel aggrieved or feel that their rights have been infringed in that way. But I think just having this dialogue, having this national dialogue, is going to help us move the process of further respect and the issue of equality along much in a very positive manner. Because before, people were hesitant to have even the conversation that certain things exist. I mean, we know statistically that women are paid less in the workforce than their male counterparts to do the exact same job. So these are some of the challenges that as women and as professionals we face. But yet, we have to keep keeping on and keep getting the message out there and keep working with our male counterparts, that many of them, like I said, they themselves are the champions in helping to move us in the right direction in that respect.
Any final words, Minister Rivers?
There's lots going on. I am, never a dull moment in the day in the life of. A number of pieces of legislation is in train as well. I just wanted to, I didn't have an opportunity to really talk about it before when we talked about labor, but I'd given an indication in the House previously that I intended to bring some legislative reform with respect to pensions and the labor law as well. So the drafting instructions are with the legislative drafting department on that. So I'm just waiting to basically get that back to be able to have bring that forward first to cabinet and then of course to the House. So we've got movement has already taken place. Some of the concerns that I inherited. Again, a lot of these things I stepped into a very very exciting ministry with respect to issues and fires to put out. But I'm committed to continue to work very fastidiously, very meticulously, and actually looking to really deal with the real issues and try to find lasting and meaningful solutions that will help to move the country, not just during this administration or this generation, but for generations to come. It's that type of lasting, positive impact that I'm hoping to be able to make as a member of this government.